My mom and dad, who revolved around my sister Barbara every single day, had no idea that I had another family. Inside the mirror. The week mom and dad took Barbara on a 3-day trip for her therapy sessions, they finally remembered they had another child waiting at home. By the time they rushed back through the front door, panic written all over their faces, they looked as if they expected to find me starving, filthy, or dead. Instead, I sat quietly on the couch with brushed hair, clean clothes, and warm cheeks from a full stomach. Mom froze first. Her trembling relief slowly twisted into confusion. "Somerville," she whispered. "Have you been taking care of yourself these past few days?" I shook my head, honestly. "I stayed inside the mirror," I said softly. "There's another mom and dad in there. They took care of me." For one brief second, something uncertain flickered across their faces. Fear, maybe, or disbelief. Then it vanished beneath anger. Thunderous, suffocating anger. "You know your sister has autism," Mom snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut skin. "And you're making up ridiculous lies just to compete for attention?" Dad dragged a tired hand down his face, years of frustration pouring out at once. "We are already exhausted because of Barbara," he said coldly. "Do you understand that?" Before I could explain, they shoved me into my bedroom. The lock clicked loudly behind me. Mom's voice came through the door like poison. "This family cannot afford 2 autistic children. If you lie again, you won't be staying in this house anymore." I curled into the corner beside my bed, hugging my knees so tightly my arms hurt. My chest burned from crying too hard, each breath catching painfully in my throat. The room grew quieter, then colder. A soft scratching sound came from the mirror across the room. Slowly, a pale, withered hand reached through the glass. Its fingers were thin and icy as they brushed gently over my hair. Unlike my real mother, the touch was careful, tender. A hoarse voice drifted from inside the mirror. "If they abandon you again," the woman whispered, "I'll take you away with us." I looked up with tear-blurred eyes. Inside the mirror stood another family, dim and gray like an old photograph. The mirror mother looked tired, but her eyes were warm in a way my real mother's eyes no longer were. Behind her stood a tall man who watched me quietly with sadness etched into his face. The bedroom door suddenly creaked open. The mirror mother quickly crawled backward into the darkness of the glass. The surface rippled once, then became normal again. Mom stood at the doorway, staring at me for a long moment. Her face was unreadable. "We're having guests over later," she said flatly. "Come help." I followed her downstairs in silence. The house smelled like vanilla frosting and roasted food. Decorations hung across the ceiling, and bright ribbons curled around the dining chairs. For one dangerous moment, hope fluttered weakly inside my chest. Mom handed me a stack of plastic plates. "Don't just stand there," she said impatiently. "Cut the cake." I stared at the large cake in the center of the table. White frosting, pink flowers, my favorite strawberry filling. Halfway through slicing it, realization hit me. Today was my birthday. They remembered. My nose stung instantly. I blinked hard, wiping away tears before anyone noticed. For a moment, memories came rushing back, warm and golden. Before Barbara got sick, Mom used to braid my hair every morning. Dad used to carry me on his shoulders through the grocery store. When they took Barbara shopping, they always brought me back pretty dresses instead of oversized hand-me-downs that smelled faintly of mothballs. Back then, they had loved me too. A terrible thought rose quietly inside me. If I disappeared into the Mirror family forever, would they miss me? Mom clasped her hands excitedly, destroying the fantasy before it could grow. "Barbara can finally call us Mom and Dad," she announced happily. "This is worth celebrating." Dad smiled proudly. "When everyone gets here, maybe Barbara will even talk more." The warmth inside me died instantly. So the cake was never for me. The doorbell rang, and relatives flooded into the house carrying gifts and loud excitement. Barbara stood in the center of the room like a tiny celebrity, surrounded by flashing attention. "Barbara, I'm Uncle Dexter. Aunt Bella brought you a present. Look how pretty she is today." Barbara clutched the hem of her dress nervously, avoiding everyone's eyes. Her lips stayed tightly shut. As the excitement began fading into awkwardness, Dad shot me a warning glance. "Help her, like always." I forced a smile onto my face and squeezed between the adults. "Would anyone like cake?" I asked sweetly. "Uncle Dexter, Aunt Bella, thank you for coming." The relatives immediately brightened again. "Somerville is such a sweet child. She's so polite. If my daughter talked like that, I'd be bragging for years." Only Aunt Colleen looked unimpressed. She crossed her arms and spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Sweet? Please." She's obviously showing off for attention. The room quieted slightly. "She's 5 years old," Aunt Colleen continued. "When my son was her age, he could recite Shakespeare backward. Greeting people isn't impressive. She's just trying to outshine a child with autism." Mom and Dad stiffened. Their expressions changed immediately, guilt turning into irritation. As if they had suddenly remembered I was supposed to stay small, silent, and invisible beside Barbara. Ever since Barbara's condition worsened, they had forced me to talk constantly around her. Speak more. Encourage her. Keep talking. Sometimes Mom would grab my shoulders so tightly her nails hurt. "Mouths are for talking, Somerville," she would cry desperately. "Why can't you help your sister? Why do you always upset her?" But Barbara's version of kindness was secretly stuffing candy into my mouth when she knew I wasn't allowed sugar. I was only 3 then. By the time anyone noticed, my baby teeth had rotted badly enough that every night became torture. I would lie awake crying from the pain while my gums throbbed like fire. Eventually, all my baby teeth had to be pulled out. Even then, Mom and Dad blamed me. Dad would crouch in front of me and lecture sternly. "The therapist said someone in the family has to guide Barbara properly. You have a responsibility to help her." I tried. I tried until my throat hurt, until my voice disappeared, until I started dreading the sound of my own name. But nothing I did was ever enough. Now, standing under the relative stairs, I twisted my fingers together anxiously, unsure how to answer their questions. Dad suddenly shoved a plate of strawberries into my hands. "Go eat somewhere else," he muttered. "And stop talking so much." I stared down at the bright red strawberries. They were freshly washed, tiny beads of water still clinging to them. Before I could take one, Barbara suddenly lunged forward. She slapped the plate from my hands. The strawberries exploded across the floor in red smears. Then she screamed. A sharp, piercing scream that instantly drained the color from Mom and Dad's faces. "Barbara, sweetheart, it's okay." Mom rushed to her immediately. Dad knelt beside her in panic. I stood there frozen while strawberry juice stained my socks like blood. Mom turned toward me with red-rimmed eyes. "Somerville," she snapped, jabbing her finger hard against my forehead. "Why are you so greedy? Barbara hasn't eaten yet." I didn't even. "You know she lacks security," Mom shouted over me. "Everything in this house comes after Barbara. Everything." Barbara buried herself against Mom while Dad rubbed her back gently, whispering comfort into her hair. No one looked at me. No one noticed the tears slipping silently down my face. I stared at the crushed strawberries scattered across the floor, and something bitter slowly spread through my chest. Because deep down, I already knew the truth. In this family, Barbara would always come first. And I would always come second, even on my own birthday. I crouched down quietly and picked up the strawberries one by one from the floor. Their red juice stained my fingertips as I carefully placed them back onto the plate. "I know I was wrong," I whispered under my breath. "I don't want the strawberries anymore. Barbara can have all of them." The room fell strangely silent. Uncle Torres frowned slightly, surprise flickering across his face. "Why has Somerville become so obedient?" he asked softly. "When she was 3, she guarded her food like a little wolf cub. Once something landed in her hands, nobody could take it away." His voice carried genuine concern, warm enough to make something ache inside my chest. For a moment, my guard slipped. "Because the mom in the mirror already gave me strawberries," I murmured honestly. The second the words left my mouth, I realized my mistake. Mom and Dad's expressions froze into icy horror. I quickly covered my mouth with both hands and shook my head frantically, as if I could somehow stuff the words back inside. But Aunt Colleen only let out a cold laugh. "Listen to her," she sneered. "Somerville really knows how to put on a show. Pretending to be pitiful for sympathy, making up stories about a mother in the mirror." Her lips curled sharply. "Why don't you just say you're planning to move into the mirror too?" My body went stiff. How did Aunt Colleen know? How did she know the mirror mother wanted to take me away? Mom caught the fear flashing across my face and immediately misunderstood it. Her voice trembled with anger. "Somerville." The entire room seemed to shake at the sound of my name. "Didn't I teach you not to lie? Stop this nonsense right now and tell everyone you made the mirror story up." I instinctively glanced toward the hallway leading upstairs, toward my bedroom, toward the mirror. And there she was. The mirror mother slowly leaned out from inside the glass, her hollow eyes fixed on me. Her mouth stretched into a strange, crooked smile that made coldness crawl down my spine. My fingers trembled. And Mom, I stammered weakly. I'm not lying. There really is another mom in the mirror. Mom's stare sharpened immediately, full of warning and pressure. The rest of my words died in my throat. Uncle Torres, however, didn't laugh. Having grown up deeply religious, he looked disturbed instead. He slowly set down his teacup and frowned. I don't think Somerville is joking, he said carefully. Children usually don't invent stories like this repeatedly unless they truly believe them. He glanced toward the staircase. Maybe there really is something wrong with that mirror. Mom's face lost color instantly. Torres opened his bag and pulled out several small religious items, muttering quietly under his breath. Why don't I take a look around the house? Before he could question me further, a sharp scream shattered the room.
Barbara.
Everyone spun around in panic. Barbara stood beside the shattered remains of a porcelain plate, her breathing ragged. In her trembling hand was a jagged shard stained red. Blood trickled down her wrist. Mom screamed and rushed toward her immediately. Barbara. Dad grabbed towels while Mom held Barbara tightly, sobbing as she tried to stop the bleeding. The relatives erupted into chaos around us. In the middle of it all, Dad suddenly turned toward me. His face looked terrifyingly cold. Did you do this on purpose? He demanded. Did you make up those lies to upset Barbara? I froze. His eyes were filled with disappointment, so deep it felt heavier than hatred. We've treated you so well, he said bitterly. How could you become this vicious? I shook my head violently, tears blurring everything around me. Dad, I'm not lying, but he wasn't listening anymore. Nobody was. The celebration ended in chaos. Relatives hurried out whispering among themselves while Dad carried Barbara to the car and Mom cried beside her. By the time the front door closed behind them, the house felt unbearably empty. I stood alone in the middle of the living room, staring at the blood-stained towel abandoned on the couch. I had already tried so hard. Why wouldn't they believe me? Barbara's injury wasn't serious. The cut had barely broken skin. But Mom and Dad still stayed beside her at the hospital day and night, as if she might disappear the moment they looked away. For the next several days, I barely saw them except when they returned home briefly to cook food for Barbara. And every single time I approached them, they instinctively pulled away from me. Somerville, Mom snapped one evening, exhaustion dark beneath her eyes. Stop hovering around us. Dad's voice turned sharp. You already pushed Barbara into hurting herself. Do you want to see her die too before you're satisfied? My heart dropped painfully. I shook my head so hard my vision blurred. No, I whispered. I don't want Barbara to die. And I meant it. Even when Barbara had poured scalding water onto my arms during her meltdowns, I never hated her. Even when she hacked uneven chunks from my hair with safety scissors while I cried, I still forgave her. Because deep down, I truly believed Barbara became sick because of me. If I hadn't been born, maybe Mom and Dad would still smile. Maybe our house would still feel warm. But hearing Mom speak to me like I was some kind of monster still hurt more than anything Barbara had ever done. 2 days later, Barbara finally returned home. Oddly enough, she seemed different afterward. Livelier, more responsive. She clung to Mom and Dad constantly, softly calling them Mom and Dad, over and over as if testing the words on her tongue. Sometimes she even spoke short sentences. Mom cried every time it happened. She started talking because she felt sorry for me. She told everyone proudly. When I cried at the hospital, Barbara finally responded. I didn't understand. I had spent years talking to Barbara until my throat hurt, trying desperately to help her speak. Why did she suddenly begin talking for Mom so easily? That night, hugging the ragged doll the mirror mother had given me, I quietly pushed open Barbara's bedroom door. The warm yellow light inside spilled across the hallway floor. Mom and Dad sat on either side of Barbara's bed, speaking gently to her like she was something fragile and precious. From now on, just focus on getting better, Mom whispered while brushing Barbara's hair back lovingly. No matter how much Somerville competes for our attention, Mommy only loves you. Dad nodded immediately. That's right. We ignored Somerville on purpose these past few days to teach her a lesson. Barbara's eyes reddened. She lowered her head and spoke softly. Don't blame Somerville. She's still little. Then she added in a trembling voice, maybe it would have been better if I didn't exist. Mom and Dad panicked instantly. Dad wrapped an arm around her shoulders protectively. Don't say nonsense like that, he soothed gently. You'll always be our precious treasure. Then his expression darkened slightly. As for Somerville, Mom sighed heavily. She's become too difficult lately. Dad nodded. We're planning to send her to Aunt Colleen's house for a while. Once you recover completely, we'll bring her back. The doll slipped from my hands and hit the floor with a soft thud. All three of them looked toward the doorway in shock. For a moment, panic flashed across Mom and Dad's faces at being overheard. But when they saw my pale expression, Dad simply sighed tiredly. Since you already heard us, he said flatly, there's no point hiding it anymore. My legs felt heavy, as though they were filled with wet sand. I looked at them with trembling eyes. Mom, Dad. My voice cracked painfully. Just because Barbara is sick, are you going to stop loving me? Dad immediately looked away. He couldn't even face me. Mom, however, only snorted impatiently. Didn't you say there are parents inside the mirror who love you more than we do? She snapped. Then take your mirror and go live there. The words struck harder than a slap. Before I could respond, Mom shoved me out of the room and slammed the door shut. I stood alone in the hallway listening to their soft laughter inside. A warm, happy little family of three. And me? I was just the unwanted extra person standing outside the door. I returned to my room silently. The mirror mother was already waiting for me. A warm meal sat neatly on the desk beside the mirror, steam rising gently into the dim room. The scent of fried eggs and soup filled the air. The mirror mother slowly unfolded her thin, shriveled body from the darkness inside the glass and smiled at me. Come eat, she croaked softly. Afterward, come with Mom. Your father is waiting for you too. Her voice sounded strange, cracked and unnatural, yet somehow kinder than the voices outside my room. I nodded numbly and sat down to eat. Halfway through the meal, tears began falling silently into my rice. I tried wiping them away, but more kept coming. Before I leave, can I say goodbye to Mom and Dad? I whispered. The mirror mother's smile widened unnaturally. Be quick, she said. It's almost time. I picked up a pencil with shaky fingers and carefully wrote a farewell letter. The paper became wrinkled where my tears landed. Then I ran downstairs and hugged Mom and Dad tightly one last time. Mom, Dad, goodbye. Mom barely glanced at the letter before tossing it into the trash like junk mail. Dad frowned impatiently. Don't think acting obedient now will change our minds, he said coldly. Aunt Colleen will be here in 5 minutes. Go pack your things. I nodded quietly. Even though I already knew I was leaving forever, my chest still hurt unbearably. Back in my room, I didn't pack anything. I simply sat on the bed staring around at the place I had lived for 6 years. The faded wallpaper, the cracked ceiling, the stuffed rabbit missing one button eye. Everything suddenly felt unfamiliar. At least inside the mirror, there were parents who wanted me. At least there, nobody hated me for existing. Maybe living with the mirror family really would make me happier. A loud voice suddenly echoed outside my bedroom. This door won't open. Aunt Colleen shouted. Somerville locked herself inside. Mom and Dad immediately began pounding against the door. Somerville. Dad barked angrily. You've gotten completely out of control. Open this door right now. Mom yelled. Even if we have to drag you out ourselves today, we'll fix those bad habits of yours. The pounding grew louder. Then came a violent crash. The door burst open. Mom, Dad, and Aunt Colleen froze instantly. I stood quietly in front of the mirror, perfectly still. I turned toward them one last time and waved goodbye. Mom and Dad's faces drained of all color. For the first time in a long while, they looked truly afraid. Dad stepped forward instinctively. Somerville, he said hoarsely. Come here. Right now. But before he could reach me, 2 pale, withered arms slowly emerged from the mirror behind me. Mom screamed. Dad stopped dead in his tracks. The room became freezing cold. The mirror surface rippled like dark water. I looked back at the family who had spent years pushing me away. Then I turned around without hesitation and threw myself into the mirror mother's embrace. The cold didn't hurt. That was the first thing I noticed. It should have hurt. The air bit at my skin like thousands of tiny needles, but my body felt numb, as if I had been wrapped in thick winter cloth. The mirror mother's arms closed around me. Her body was stiff and brittle, like holding a bundle of dried branches. But she held me tightly, and her cracked lips pressed against the top of my head. Good girl, she whispered. Good girl. Behind me, the mirror surface sealed shut with a sound like breaking ice. I couldn't hear Mom screaming anymore. I couldn't hear Dad shouting my name. Everything had gone perfectly, completely silent. The mirror father stood a few steps away, watching me with that same sad expression. Up close, his face looked wrong somehow. His skin was stretched too thin over his cheekbones, and his eyes seemed sunk too far back into his skull, like two stones dropped into deep water. "Welcome home," he said quietly. His voice sounded like wind blowing through a cracked window. I looked around. The world inside the mirror looked almost exactly like my real house. Same staircase.
Same hallway.
Same faded wallpaper. But everything was washed in gray, as if someone had drained every color out of the world and left only shadows behind. The furniture was slightly different too. The couch was older, more worn. The kitchen table had a deep scratch across its surface that didn't exist in the real house. And the walls were covered in small pencil marks measuring a child's height, but the dates written beside them were from years I didn't recognize. 1973, 1975, 1978.